In 1959, a group of hikers set out on an expedition in the Ural Mountains of Russia. They were young, but an experienced group, and should have had no issue with the trip. Unfortunately, none of them were ever seen alive again. Their bodies were discovered in some of the most unimaginable ways possible. Physical injuries and succumbing to the elements are some of the plausible theories. But was there something else that stalked them and waited in the dark of the night for the right moment to strike? Some evidence may certainly point that way, but for what truly happened to the group, we'll never know. So you'll just have to keep listening, because this story is coming up. Thanks for coming back to a new chapter of the Insidious Agenda podcast. I'm your host, Nick, and on this week's episode, we're going to discuss the unexplained event known as the Dyatlov Pass incident. Ensure you're subscribed so you don't miss any episodes of this podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, remember to turn on your notifications so you know when a new episode comes out. Now, without further ado, let's travel back to February of 1959 and join up with the Dyatlov group. In early February of 1959, a young 23-year-old college student named Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov, who was a radio engineering student at Ural Polytechnical Institute, formed a group of 9 other hikers, 8 men and 2 women total, a group that would accompany him on an upcoming expedition in Russia's Ural Mountains in the Sverdlovsk Oblast. The other members of his group were Yuri Doroshenko, Lyudmila Dubanina, Georgy Krivonishenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Nikolai Thibodeau-Brignol, and Yuri Yudin. There was also a late addition to the group, a man named Semyon Zolotaryov, who was much older than the group of 20-somethings, as he was 37. This was no ordinary hiking expedition, and believe it or not, it had an underlying purpose. All of those who would attend held a Grade 2 hiker qualification. This trip, by traversing over at least 300 kilometers, would earn each of them their Grade 3 certificate, which was the highest grade available in the Soviet Union at the time. Dyatlov largely recruited the group from his university, largely fellow students and peers. The intent of the group was to travel through the Ural Mountains in an attempt to reach some of the extreme northern regions of the Sverdlovsk Oblast and the upper parts of the Lozva River. The end state would be achieved when the group reached the mountain known as Otorten. The plan was well thought out and even received approval from the Sverdlovsk City Route Commission, confirming the group of 10 hikers on the 8th of January 1959. Even from the beginning, the hike had a sense of foreboding. The route was classified as a Category 3, the highest possible difficulty. Also, it would be undertaken in the middle of winter, offering the most severe conditions and adding a great amount of difficulty in traversal. The group did not believe that this would be a hindrance for them, as they were not only well equipped for the route, but had the requisite training and experience to survive the austere conditions that they would encounter. One of the neat things about the Dyatlov expedition was that the group kept a diary and wrote in it every day. Entries were made by the various members of the group and outlined some of their experiences along their trek. There was not only one, but 3 diaries to have been found in the group's possession. To add more value to this episode, we'll read their diary entries as we progress through it, and it's best to hear the story from the hikers themselves. On the 23rd of January, the Dyatlov group received their route book for the trip. This course would follow what was known as the Number 5 Trail. They would set out from the city known today as Yekaterinburg. Diary entry, January 23rd, Yuri Krivonyshenko. We're on the road again. We are now sitting in room 531. Or rather, of course not sitting, but frantically shoving into backpacks oatmeal, cans, canned meat. The head of provision distribution is overseeing everything, that everybody gets everything. Where are my felt boots? Zineda Kolmogorova. Can we play mandolin on the train? Of course. We forgot the salt 3 kilograms, Igor. Where are you? Where is Doroshenko? Why didn't he take 20 pecks? Give me 15 kopecks to call. The scales. Where are the scales? It doesn't fit, damn it. Who has the knife? Yuri takes this to the station. Slav Halizov just got here. Hello? Hello, can I get 15 kopecks? Lyoda is counting the money. Lots of money. The room is an artistic mess. And here we are on the train. We sang all the songs that we know, learn new ones. Everyone goes to sleep at 3 a.m. I wonder what awaits us in this trip. What will we encounter? The boys solemnly swore not to smoke the entire trip. I wonder how much willpower they have to get by without cigarettes. Everybody is falling asleep, and behind the window, Ural taiga is spread in all directions. The group's initial travel plan was to take a train to the city of Ivdel, a town at the center of the Sverdlovsk Oblast, arriving in the early hours on the morning of the 25th of January. Diary entry, January 24th, Yuri Yudin. 7 a.m. we arrived in Serov. We traveled with Blinov group. They have things for hunting and other accessories. At the station, we were met with hell of hospitality. They didn't allow us into the building. The policeman stares at us suspiciously. There is no crime or vandalism in the city, as it's supposed to be in times of communism. And then Yuri Krivo started a song. The cops grabbed him and took him away. At the attention of citizen Krivonyshenko, Sergeant explained that rules of Section 3 prohibited all activity that would disturb the peace of the passengers. It is perhaps the only train station where songs are forbidden, so we stayed without singing. Finally, everything is settled by end of day. We are leaving Serov to Ivdel at 6:30 p.m. We were welcomed warmly in the school near the railway station. The steward, she is also a janitor, boiled some water and helped us with everything we needed for the preparation for the trek. We have the whole day free. We want to go to the city, to visit the nature museum, or to take a trip to the factory, but too much time is passed in distribution of equipment and cleaning it. 12 p.m. In the interval between first and second shifts in school, we organized meeting with pupils, the room crammed with so many curious children. Questions didn't end. We had to explain and show to every kid everything from torches to tents. It took us 2 hours, and kids didn't want to let us go. They sang songs to each other. The whole school saw us at the station. Everything ended as expected. When we were leaving, the kids yelled and cried, asking Tsina to stay with them. They promised to behave and study well. In the train cart, a young drunk accused us of stealing his booze from his pocket. For the second time this day, the cops were involved. Discussion about love provoked by Zineda Kolmogorova. Songs, ticket check, dubenina under the seats. Garlic with bread and no water. And we arrived in Ivdel around 12 a.m. Large waiting room. Total freedom of action. We took shifts to watch over our stuff all night long. Bus to Vitsai leaves early in the morning. From here, they would travel by truck to the town of Vizhai, which was known as the last inhabited settlement in the northern part of that province. They would use this final stop as an opportunity to stock up on provisions and get some rest. Diary entry, January 25th, Alexander Kolevatov. We got up at 5:30, quickly gathered and left for the city of Yvdel with the first bus. After an hour of waiting, we managed to grab a bus. The 25-seater was forced to accommodate a full 25 plus 20 backpacks, packed capacity, and as many pairs of skis. We were full up to the ceiling. First layer of passengers sat on the seats, on a pile of skis, on backpacks. Second layer of passengers sat on the backs of the seats. Finding a place for legs on the shoulders of comrades. It was not so tight, however, as not to sing, so we did almost all the way to Vitsai. The trip was not uneventful. The bus made a small detour away from the highway, in the village of Shipino, and we were given the chance to step out, which we did with pleasure. 4 of the most agile went far ahead to the settlement of Talista to see the power station. Suddenly they heard, "The bus!" We rush out the door, but alas, it was too late. The bus passed us by, and we were forced to chant after it as fast as we can. We hoped fate would be merciful, and perhaps we would catch up with it. I was part of the Agile 4. However, the first 100 meters clearly demonstrated the advantages of a 50-horsepower engine. Our heels flashed far behind the bus, and the gap widened. The prospect to walk about 30 kilometers on the highway with no breakfast and no lunch already seemed quite real. When suddenly, I mentioned that fate is merciful. The mercy came in the form of a girl going to Vitsai that hailed the bus and stopped the object of our persecution. A minute later, we were already safely sitting on the second floor of the seats and traveling to Vitsai. We arrived in Vitsai around 2 p.m. It turned out that we can continue our automobile journey in the next morning. Warmly, we said goodbye to Blinov's group, who went further to the west of Vitsai in the deep forest area. After dinner, which was held in a warm, friendly atmosphere, we moved to the hotel, which was the usual hut with 3 windows. We went to the cinema, leaving home Doroshenko and Kolevatov. We watched The Symphony in Gold, came back in a musical mood. Now we're getting busy readying the equipment. Tonight, according to the local commandant, we will leave on. Diary entry, January 26th, Georgy Krivonishenko. We slept in a so-called hotel, 2 people per bed. Sasha, Alexander Kolevatov, and Krivo, Yuri Krivonishenko, slept on the floor between beds. Woke up at 9 a.m. Everyone slept well, despite the fact we did not completely close the small window, and the room got a bit cold. Outside temperature is negative 17 degrees Celsius. We did not boil water in the morning. Wood was damp. In the evening, it took us 6 hours to boil the water. Had breakfast in the dining room, goulash and tea. When they handed us the lukewarm tea, Gosya, Igor Dyatlov, said to us with a smirk, "If the tea is cold, then go outside to drink it. It will be hot." Original thought. We negotiated to go to Settlement 41 by a truck. We started at 13:10 and arrived at 16:30. We froze pretty good at the back of the truck. While traveling, we sang songs, discussed various topics like love, friendship, cancer illness, and cures. In Settlement 41, we were greeted warmly. They gave us a separate room in a hostel. We talked a lot with the local workers. I remembered particularly the red-bearded man. The beard, that's what his friends call him. Ognev is an old friend. He is described in Luda Dubinina's private diary. Lunch was served, we ate, and now we're resting. Some of the group is watching a movie in the adjacent room. The rest of the group is rummaging through their backpacks. Rustic, or Rustem Slobodin, is playing his mandolin while talking to Kolya. Nikolai Thibault Brignol. I am going to do some adjustment to the equipment. The group would set out from Vedzai on the 27th. They would not get far into the hike before experiencing a minor setback. One of their party, Yuri Yudin, was forced to give up the endeavor on the second day due to health complications. Yuri had suffered from many illnesses throughout his 21-year life, but the two that were affecting him now were severe joint pain, known as rheumatism, and a congenital heart defect. Diary entry, January 27th, Yuri Doroshenko. The weather's really good. The wind is at our backs, and the lads made a great deal with the locals for a horse to drive us to the second settlement north. But it will be about 24 kilometers from the 41st settlement. We helped Uncle Slava unload hay from a carriage and waited for the horse. It went to get more hay and wood. We waited until 4 p.m. The boys sang copying of some songs. One man sang beautifully. We heard the number of illegal prison songs. Before that, we bought 4 loaves of bread, soft, warm bread. We ate 2 loaves. Horse is slow. What a pleasure to go without backpacks. We covered 8 kilometers in 2 hours. It's getting dark. The horse is causing the delay. Yuri Yudin is still with us. He fell suddenly ill, and he can't continue with the trek. He wants to gather few minerals for the university and return. Second north is an abandoned geological site consisting of 20 to 25 houses. Only one is suitable for living. In complete darkness, we found the village and the house. We started the fire with wood boards. Smoke came from the stove. Several people hurt their hands on old nails. Everything is well. Then the horse came. We were talking and joking until 3 in the morning. The following day, the group would say farewell to Yuri Yudin at the second northern settlement before setting off on their next leg of the trip. Diary entry, January 28th, Lyuda Dubinina. We were awakened by the rumbling voices of Yurka Krivonishenko and Sasha Kolevatov. Weather so far is smiling at us. It's only -8°C outside. After breakfast, some of the guys, led by Yuri Yudin, our well-known geologist, went to look for local minerals. They didn't find anything except for pyrite and quartz veins in the rock. Took them long time to wax their skis and adjust the mounting. Yuri Yudin goes back home today. It is a pity, of course, that he leaves us, especially for me and Zina, but nothing can be done about it. Started at 11:45. We got up to the river Lozva. We take turns to head the group for about 10 minutes. Snow cover is significantly less than last year. We have to stop and scrape the wet melting snow from the bottom of the skis. Yurka Kri is behind and makes topos of the route. The bank of the river near the second north, especially the right bank, are limestone cliffs that rise high at places. Overall, the terrain becomes flatter, especially covered by forest. We stop to rest at 5:30 p.m. on the river Lozva. Today, we spend our first night in the tent. The guys are busy with the stove, sewing curtains out of sheets. With something completed, and others not, we sit at dinner. After dinner, we sit for a long time around the campfire and sing heartfelt songs. Zina even tries to learn to play mandolin under guidance of other musician Rustik Slobodin. Then we resume our discussions, mostly about love. Someone comes up with an idea that we need a special notebook for ideas that we might come up with. Conspiring, we started going into the tent, 2 people at a time. The suspended stove radiates heat and divides the tent in 2 sections. The further section is occupied by me and Zina. Nobody wants to sleep by the stove. We agree that Yurka Kri will sleep there. On the other side sleeps Kolevatov. Yurka couldn't stand the heat, and after lying down for 1 to 2 minutes, he got up and moved to the second section, cursing and accusing us of treason. After that, they still argued, but about something for a long time, that at the end all was quiet. Diary entry, January 29th, Nikolai Thibault. Second day of our hike, we made our way from the Lozva River to the Ospia River. We walked along the Mansi Trail. The weather is -13 degrees Celsius. The wind is weak. We often find ice on the Lozva River. That's all. Diary entry, January 30th. Unknown. Today is a third cold night on the bank of Ospia River. We are getting used to it. The stove does a great job. Some of us, Thibault and Krivonishenko, think we need to build a steam heat in the tent. The curtains in the tent are quite justified. We get up at 8:30 a.m. After breakfast, we walk along the Ospia River. But the ice, again, doesn't allow us to move forward. We went on the bank, on a sledge deer trail. In the middle of the road, we saw the Mansi shed. Yes, Mansi. Mansi, this word comes up more often in our conversations. Mansi are people of the north, small Khanty Mansi nation located in the Saalhard with 8,000 population. Very interesting and unique people that inhabit the North Polar Urals, close to the Tyumen region. They have a written language and leave characteristic signs on forest trees. Weather, temperature in the morning, -17 C, day, -13, night, -26. The wind is strong. Southwest, snow begins to fall. Heavy clouds, drop in temperature. The temperature is normal for northern Urals. This is a story about the forest. Mansi signs tell about animals they saw, resting stops, and other things. It is particularly interesting to solve its meaning for hikers as well as historians. Deer Trail turns into a trodden path and then ends. To go without a trail is very hard. Snow is 120 centimeters, 4 feet deep. The forest gradually thins and trees get smaller. You can feel the altitude. Lots of dwarf birches and pines. It is impossible to walk on the river. It is not completely frozen. There is ice and water under the snow. We have to go back on the bank of the river. The day is over, and we have to find a place for a bivouac. That's the stop for the night. Strong west wind. It blows the snows off the cedar and pine trees, creating the impression of a snowfall. As usual, we quickly start a fire and pitch the tent on some fir birches. We are warmed by the fire and go to sleep. Final diary entry, January 31st, Igor Dyatlov. Weather today is a bit worse. Wind, west, snowing, probably from the pines, since the sky is perfectly clear. Started relatively early, around 10 a.m. Got back on the Mansi Trail. Up to now, we're following a Mansi Trail on which not so long ago passed a hunter with a deer. Yesterday, it seems we stumbled upon his resting stop. The deer didn't go any further. The hunter took the beaten trail by himself. We are following in his steps. Had a surprisingly good overnight. Air is warm and dry, though it's 18 to -24 degrees Celsius. Walking is especially hard today. We can't see the trail. Have to grope our way through at times. Can't do more than 1.5 kilometers per hour. Trying out new ways to clear the path. The first in line drops his backpack, skis forward 5 minutes, comes back for a 10 to 15 minute break, then catches up with the group. That's one way to keep laying ski tracks non-stop. Hard on the second hiker though, who has to follow the new trail with full gear on his back. We gradually leave the Ospia Valley. It's upwards all the way but goes rather smoothly. Thin birch grove replaces firs. The end of forest is getting closer. Wind is western, warm, piercing with speed like the draft from airplanes at takeoff. Firm, open spaces. I can't even think of setting up storage here. It's nearly 4. We have to start looking for a place to pitch the tent. We go south, in the Ospia Valley. It seems this place has the deepest snow. Wind, not strong. Snow is about 1.22 meters deep. We're exhausted, but start setting up for the night. Firewood is scarce, mostly damp firs. We build the campfire on the logs, too tired to dig a fire pit. Dinner's in the tent, nice and warm. Can't imagine such comfort on the ridge, with howling wind outside, hundreds of kilometers away from human settlements. That entry was the last recorded in the group's diary. There are many pictures of entries in the other diary as well, and great pieces of evidence. I'll drop a link to the Dyatlov Pass website in the show notes for any who are interested in reading further. It's known that the group set up camp on the night of the 31st on an area known as Height 1079, or the Kolat Sayakil Mountain. They had dinner and settled in for the night. What happened next, we'll never know for sure. As the days ticked by, Yuri Yudin waited to hear any news from the group. Before he departed the trip, Dyatlov had told the group's sports club that he would send a telegram when they returned to Vizhai to let them know the good news. The news was expected to arrive no later than the 12th of February, although, before he departed the group, Dyatlov informed Yudin that he anticipated it might be a bit longer than expected. The 12th of February came and went, with no word from the Dyatlov expedition. There was no cause for immediate concern, as that date was only an estimate. And, as was expected by Dyatlov, there would likely be some delay. About a week later, by the 20th of February, the relatives of the hikers grew gravely concerned. They would demand that a rescue operation be organized to find the missing group. A group was fashioned by the head of the institute and would soon depart thereafter. This rescue group consisted largely of volunteer students and instructors. As this would not yield much success, the army and the police forces would become involved, owing to them having aircraft search capabilities. The search met with its first success on the 26th of February. A student volunteer named Mikhail Shravin was the first to come across the group's final campsite. He would find a tent and say the tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. More strange than the initial finding of the gear was what was noticed by the investigators. That tent had a large gash in it, though someone had tried to cut themselves out of the tent for the inside, or something cut it from the outside in. The next thing discovered were 9 sets of footprints that led away from the tent. From the footprints, the investigators determined that those who ran left in a hurry. They discerned that those people were wearing only a single boot, socks, or were even barefoot. They followed the footprints down to the edge of a nearby group of trees on the opposite side of the pass, approximately 1.5 kilometers away. Here, they found the trace remains of a fire and the first 2 bodies, Georgy Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. The pair was found shoeless, dressed only in underwear. Branches on the nearby tree were broken up to 5 feet high. This appeared to be an attempt by one of the 2 to climb it. This was possibly an attempt to figure out where they were and possibly reorient themselves to their camp. At various intervals between that tree, the investigation party discovered the remains of 3 more members. They were Igor Dyatlov, Zeneda Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. It would be 4 more months before the bodies of the other 4 members were discovered. On the 4th of May, The 4 bodies were found in a nearby ravine about 75 meters past the trees where Krivonashenko and Doroshenko were found. They were located under about 4 meters of snow. It was noted that 3 out of the 4 were dressed better than all of the others, with one interesting caveat to this. It appears some of the clothing that people had died in was removed from those who died before them. Lyudmila Dubinina, for example, was found to be wearing Krivonashenko's burned and torn pants, while her left foot and shin were wrapped in a torn jacket. After the first 5 were found, an inquest was convened immediately. Medical examination found no injuries on any of the bodies, save for a small crack in the skull of Slobodin. It was determined that the 5 had died from hypothermia, owing to their overexposure to the elements. It wouldn't be until the discovery of the other 4 cadavers that the narrative would begin to shift. 3 of these bodies showed signs of fatal injuries. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had major damage to his skull. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures. The doctor who examined them, Boris Vorojdeny, determined that the force required to cause an injury like that would have to have been something akin to a car crash. One of the important things to take note of is that the bodies had no external wounds that could have been associated with bone fractures. It appeared as though the hikers had been exposed to some high level of pressure or concussion. It was also discovered that the second group, those found in the ravine, all suffered some kind of post-mortem soft tissue damage. Zolotaryov was missing his eyes, Kolevatov his eyebrows, and Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and lips, in addition to some facial tissue and fragments of skull bone. One of the chief early speculations was that the group could possibly have been killed by the Mansi people in the area. After all, the hikers did inadvertently come onto their lands. After some of the local Mansi people were interrogated, not enough evidence was found to support the hypothesis. Mainly, as investigators only found the footprints of the hikers, and there was no clear sign of a hand-to-hand struggle with any other party. When news stories began to break, journalists would put forward many points that were pulled from the files of the inquest. 6 of the group died from hypothermia, while 3 succumbed to injury. There were no indicators of any other people that were on the nearby mountain of Kolyatsyekal, which also translates to the Dead Mountain, other than the Dyatlov group. Yes, they did end up in a different spot from where they thought they were. The tent was ripped open from within. All had perished sometime about 6 to 8 hours after having dinner. All members appeared to have left the campsite of their own volition, with some trace levels of radiation having been found on the hikers' clothing. The injuries were not caused by humans, and there was no report of any internal damage. The last piece, of course, is what we already know, that there were no survivors. The Soviet government did not leave the case open to any more speculation than was already had. They quickly closed it off and attributed the loss of life to overexposure from a likely natural disaster. That was the first theory, that the hikers were put on the run by what was likely an avalanche. Possibly, the sounds of the coming avalanche would have scared the hikers to the point they abandoned their tent as they were dressed and driven them off into the dark, cold night. The avalanche, or items that were picked up by it, would have done enough damage to the bodies of those who suffered injuries that it would inflict mortal wounds. The only issue with this theory is that it lacked physical evidence. No avalanche was reported in that area, and there was no recognizable damage to surrounding trees. Even to the point of this publication, no avalanches have been reported in that area, ever. It's hard to believe that it was an avalanche, as the group was incredibly experienced in hiking and wouldn't have set up camp in an area prone to an avalanche. At first glance, the avalanche theory, to the public, would have been the easy explanation for what happened to the group. But with anything unexplained, many new ideas and even conspiracy theories began to emerge. One of the chiefest questions that is asked surrounding this incident is, why would a group of hikers cut themselves out of their warm tent to go out into the elements? It's possible that there may have been some internal dissension in the group. Evidence was discovered that there was romantic involvement between different members of the Dyatlov group. Friends and others closest to the group stated that there was never any infighting between the group's members. Another explanation may be something that can be rooted in the supernatural. Many theories emerge in respect to this explanation. The first is an encounter with extraterrestrials. Char marks were found near the groups of trees where the bodies were found. It was the censored opinion of the chief inspector who believed this was a confirmed source of a heat ray. He believed it was aimed at the group of terrified hikers. Another theory is that it could possibly have been a non-human, such as a mink, a kind of Russian Yeti. One of the photos taken during the hiker's trip shows what appears to be a dark, inhuman figure by a tree. Even the newspapers believed this was the work of a mink, going so far as to post, "The Yeti lives on in the northern Urals, near Mount Otorten." The Yeti theory is one of the less likely, as there was no set of footprints that would match the creature, and it was noticed that there was no struggle. There also exists a possibility that the Dyatlov group wandered into a secret Soviet weapons testing range and may have been victim to one of those weapons. The secret military testing range theory does have some credibility, especially looking at some of the evidence that was found on the bodies. As mentioned before, many showed some levels of radiation, and when they were put out for viewing, the cadavers showed a kind of orange tinge and were very weathered looking, although extreme cold would also explain that skin's appearances. This would mean that a possible percussive blast and radioactive exposure might have been the cause of the group's demise. What lends even further credit to this is that there was another group who was camping about 50 kilometers away from the Dyatlov group and noticed what they had described as floating orange orbs in the sky around the Kholat-Syakhl. Even photos recovered from Georgy Krivonashenko's camera might even show some of these glowing orbs. Possibly the blast from some of these orbs or weapons was what drove the hikers from their tent, half succumbing to hypothermia before reaching shelter, while the others kept running, taking shelter from the blasts in the tree line and subsequently falling into the ravine as they pursued the protection of further shelter. Even the chief investigator, Lev Ivanov, was convinced that the orbs were the cause of the incident. I suspected at the time, and am almost sure now, that these bright flying spheres had a direct connection to the group's death. Unfortunately, censorship in the USSR during the 90s would force him into secrecy and the abandonment of any further wishes of an explanation. Either way you have it, something caused a group of experienced hikers to abandon the only source of accommodation and heat that they had, and run into the dark of the night with hardly any of their possessions. As mentioned previously, none of these alternative theories were ever accepted by the USSR, as the case was quickly closed, and was labeled the result of a compelling natural force which the hikers were not able to overcome. One other piece that was mentioned that I haven't brought forward was the disparity in ages between Semyon Zolotaryov and the rest of the group. If you remember, Semyon was 37, while the rest were in their early 20s. Zolotaryov was a World War II veteran. Years before the Dyatlov Pass incident, he met Krivonischenko while helping to clean up a radioactive leak at a secret USSR nuclear facility. The conspiracy theory here is that Zolotaryov, Krivonischenko, and possibly another member of the group were working for the KGB and may have used the expedition as a chance to link up with other government or foreign government agents, possibly the Central Intelligence Agency or CIA. This theory purports that the group was supposed to hand over nuclear material and fake secrets to the other party, while the KGB agents were supposed to reconnoiter the other agents. When they were discovered, the other party possibly attacked and eventually massacred the Dyatlov group. It seems a bit far-fetched, but is one of the more common theories nonetheless. As the years ticked by, there really became no concrete explanation for what happened to the Dyatlov group. In 1990, then Chief Investigator Lev Ivanov would release an article that stated the team had no rational explanation for what happened. He confirmed that his investigation team noticed flying spheres, but as we already know, his opinion was censored by high-ranking members of the government from bringing information to the public. The Dyatlov Foundation was created in 1999 in Yekaterinburg by the Ural State Technical University, the renamed university that the hikers attended. Its main goal is to continue with the investigation of the incident and preserve the memory of the Dyatlov group, those who perished on the mountain. In all honesty, we may never know what happened to the Dyatlov Pass group. Whether it was a natural disaster or some other explanation remains to be seen. The one thing we can be sure of is that whatever afflicted the group was something terrifying enough to scare an entire group of experienced hikers from their tent in the middle of the night. And we're left to ask, whatever this was, is it still out there, hiding somewhere in the dark? Only the Dyatlov group and the mountain will ever know. With this message, we bring to close the story of Igor Dyatlov and his group of hikers lost forever in the Ural Mountains of Russia. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode and wanted to thank you very much for listening and coming back to the Insidious Agenda podcast. For more information about the Dyatlov expedition, I'll put those links in the show notes. And please remember, before you go, to hit subscribe or give us a thumbs up or small review so you don't miss any of the episodes to come, such as next week's episode, our first dedicated conspiracy episode, where we'll discuss the various conspiracy theories stemming from the historical event known as the Kennedy Assassination. New episodes are released every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but for now, it's time to close the cover of the Insidious Agenda. I'll see you again next week, and thank you for coming back.